Hi there, this is Daniel, and this is The Story of Daniel, Episode 6, Daniel the Freshman, Part 3. Where to take you next? That is always the quandary for me, as your guide to my past. We have visited Doc in speech class, and the theater in the round classroom. Did I mention how cold it got in that room? Every season, every day. That room was 60 degrees at warmest. Some days I would swear it was in the mid to low 50s. Moreover, I loved it. Therefore, we visit Doc. Thank you for that. I'd been meaning to visit him again for a long time. Did I mention when I saw Doc last? Let me lay that one on you before we proceed with Sweet Charity and the Red Shoes. Yes, I already knew where we were going next, silly. I remember when Doc passed away. As I have told you, Doc and I talked a lot and often. In the last year, I didn't know it then, I used to go over to his house and visit with him and people that he had at his house. Doc had a little house right on the corner of what would have been Telephone Road, and I don't know, it was right there by the Pearland Lumber, a couple of blocks down from the bank, the Pearland State Bank. And it was a house right on the corner, right as you come into Pearland. It was a classic old house. I think it had been there for like, I don't know, 100 years or something. And Doc pretty much lived there by himself. And myself and a couple of guys would always come over and visit, hang out with Doc, and have dinner with him and stuff. It was great visiting with him. Okay, back to this. I used to go over to his house and visit. Doc passed away right there in the theater office at Pearland High School, sitting at his desk. Everyone had thought Doc had just fallen asleep again, and had left him there at his desk through lunch. It wasn't until after lunch that they sent someone from the office, and found Doc had passed away. Right where Doc had always told me he wanted to die, at work. The next morning, Truman and someone from the office approached me. Seems Doc had several last requests and instructions for his burial. One of those requests was to, and I quote, never be left alone until he was interred. Seems Doc didn't like being alone. I know that when I used to visit him. Once you come over there, Doc hardly ever wanted to let you go home. And he just didn't like being alone. I think death kind of scared Doc, which was surprising. I never knew many things at all that scared Doc. So he had this request that he not be left alone overnight in the funeral home. He just didn't want that to happen. A couple of students that he was very close to had been asked but turned down the idea of spending the night in the Pearland funeral home. Then they asked me, and I asked my friend Russell Bundy. Now Russell knew Doc. Well, hell, you would have had to have lived under a rock not to have known Doc at PHS back when I was a student. Russell didn't do it because he knew Doc. He didn't know him that well. Russell did it because I begged him. Begged him to come spend the night in a funeral home with me and the now deceased Doc Springfield. With no more notice than lunch till dinner, Russell and I planned and packed to spend the night in a funeral home. I never found out why Doc had made his request, but for me, it didn't matter. Doc had added so much to who I was, and who I was to be so substantially. It was the very least I could do to keep him company until he was buried. That, Doc, Doc was like a surrogate father to me. He was a very strong, positive, successful male role model that came into my life right after my father had walked out. Funny, they were all in one type of communications or another. Now, here we go. I love Doc. Writing this right now, I miss Doc deeply. To this very day, I feel his loss in my life. So, the night in the funeral home is another story for another day. But I want somebody out there right now watching this to remind me strongly that I need to write that story for you. That night, that evening and that night at the funeral home with Russell Bundy, that is a heck of a story. So somebody out there, please remind me, I want to write that for you guys and video it for you soon. Maybe, here's a thought, maybe right before the campaign ends, so we can have it for Halloween. Super. Now we're moving on to the evening I auditioned for Sweet Charity. That night belongs to a set of memories that I hope I never lose. I remember walking into the theater and all the smells. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I remember walking into the theater and all the smells. Funny that the strongest memories I have come with scents. Is everyone that way? I had been in that theater. I got tired of typing auditorium, okay? In that theater many times before that evening. I was already quite familiar with the smells that wafted through the air there. All the familiar smells were still there. The smell of the air conditioning unit, the cleaner they used on the floors, and that darn stage. However, tonight there were new smells in the theater, and they were quite overwhelming. I came in not from the back of the theater, up by the lighting technician's booth, where someone who's used to being in the audience might enter. I came from the choir band entrance that leads right into the orchestra pit off the apron of the stage. I noticed the difference as soon as I stepped into the theater. First, the audience lights had been dimmed all the way, and all the colored strip lights above the stage were on full. The second thing I noticed was Doc and Truman. They were sitting in the center section of the theater, up about middle. And I think they had put a piece of plywood in front of them to work as a makeshift desks, so they could write on, and they had their ashtrays and their coffee cups there. Both were smoking, and if I remember correctly, Truman was taking a drink of coffee when I looked up. Excuse me, I'm horrible. I'm losing my voice. Cigarettes and coffee. I had never smelled those two smells in the theater before. There was a sign-in sheet on the stage, and I added my name. I took a seat up front. As I turned around and looked around at the other seats, sitting right up front in the couple of rows were all the newer people, all the people that were freshmen like myself. We were all quietly talking amongst ourselves. Then there were the regulars. They had congregated stage left mid-theater, and they were everyone that had been in shows before. They were sitting all together just to the right of Truman and Doc. They were not sitting quietly. They were laughing and hopping over seats, chasing each other. They were all in full play mode. I immediately did not understand their behavior. How could people be so relaxed and play when they were about to audition for a play? Now, let me tell you, I wasn't really nervous. In all the years I've auditioned, I've never really gotten nervous auditioning. Oh, I hate rejection. Lord, I absolutely hate not getting cast. But getting up on a stage and reading a script? No way! That was a fun evening for me. And that is exactly what I had, dear readers. That night, a fun evening. I was called to the stage early on in the audition. I read with Dawn, as I remember. I stumbled at first. Then I looked up at Dawn, and she quietly mouthed the word relax, relax, and motioned her hand down. I took a deep breath. I looked up again at Dawn, made eye contact, smiled, and then I acted. Moreover, for the next 6 years, I acted. And I didn't stop. Dear reader, this is the hardest part of the job that I place before me. This, right now. This is the most difficult and painful part of this task. And a lot of why this is happening in Chapter 6 and not Chapter 2. For the next 6 years, majorly the next 4, I lived a life of incredible experiences. I was taken away from a life of pain and confusion, a world of uncertainty and separation, and I was transported to a world of excitement and wonder. Another family, and oi, was I in need of one. The rest of the night, I sat close to the stage because I kept getting called on. I read with every girl there that night, and a few of the guys too. I loved every second on stage. I loved the lights, though not at first. I loved the feeling of the wood stage under my feet. I imagine there are basketball players that know what I mean. Certain stages, courts, you can feel something in the wood. That stage, there in Pearland, for whatever reason, that stage has that feeling. Every single time I walked into that stage that night was like taking a drug, and a highly addictive drug at that. By the end of the night, there was an energy in the air and a dynamic between the people that was simply euphoric. That night, not only had a show been cast, a new family had been born, and I was going to be part of it. I had already been told by the frequency of my visits to the stage, and told by Truman. About midway through the evening, I heard a deep and rumbling voice call my name from the dark. Daniel? Daniel Hanning? Wish I didn't have a sore throat. I could do a much better Truman, but I can barely speak. It was Truman, and he was calling me to get him and Doc some more coffee. There was a pot set up under the curtain of the stage. For the next 4 years, there was a pot of coffee set up underneath the apron of the stage. Anyway, I was called back, and one by one I got coffees for Doc and Truman. At that point, I sat a little further back in the center aisles of the theater, close enough to get to the stage when called quickly, and not so far that Truman had to raise his voice to talk to me or call on me. And also, so I could listen to Doc and Truman talk about the other students. The audition went late into the night. People trickled now out all along the night, until there was just a handful of people, Doc, Truman, and myself. This is when I began to see the family I was about to join. Don was sitting right beside Doc and had his ear about something. The rest of the current actors were either sitting with Don and Doc or on stage talking with Truman. From the conversations I was overhearing, the show is already cast. It was merely the formality of typing up the list and posting. I was getting tired. It was well after 10 p.m., so I went over to Truman and asked if the auditions were over and if I could go. Truman took me by the arm and led me off stage. Once we were out of earshot of everyone else, Truman told me that he couldn't exactly tell me the cast yet, but that I would have a speaking role. I was so happy. I think I walked on air all the way home, from the theater all the way to Willowcrest. I was going to be a part of that family. I was going to be seen and heard on that stage. This one night, my dear friends and readers, this one night set in motion more than a decade of events. It set the course of my life and empowered me to be the man I am today. It was a pivot point in my life. And all I did was come to the audition for a high school play. How a seemingly simple act can be a catalyst for life-altering events. That is life, my good friends. That brings us to the end of Part 3, Daniel the Freshman. Come back on Friday for Episode 6, Part 4 of the story of Daniel. And, as always, everyone out there, thank you. Thank you so much for your kindness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for reading. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for your support. And, as always, may God bless.